Boxing, and it's, well, about 30 or so minutes since the end of the trilogy fight between Saul Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. That took place in, well, I'm going to tell you the truth, that took place in Las Vegas, and what you're hearing is taking place in Salford. It was 12 rounds. It wasn't like the previous 24 rounds, but it was still a super fight. And to break down that fight and to talk about where the pair of them go from now, I'm joined by a man who spent 24 rounds in the company of Canelo and Golovkin. He was ringside, not just for the first fight in 2017, which was a draw, and not just for the rematch a year later, which Canelo got. He was ringside for those 24 rounds, and he sat down eagerly with me at about 4 o'clock in the morning, waiting for round 25. That man is, of course, former WBO super featherweight champion of the world, Barry Jones. Barry, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, it's been 40 or so minutes, I guess, since the fight ended and the decision was announced. What was your immediate reaction at the end of the fight? And now you've had 30, 40 minutes to think about it. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I was disappointed. I got to be honest. I thought that it would be a continuation of those two great fights.
Round 25.
I've been selling the whole thing, for weeks, that they're the perfect dance partners and they can never have a dull fight. I wouldn't say it was a dull fight as such, but
repetitive at times.
But as I said, we talk about great trilogies, and I saw, and I read it somewhere and I nicked it, but this wasn't Ali Fraser 3. This was Leonard Duran 3, which was a massive letdown for all us boxing fans, if you can remember back then.
But we knew that would be a letdown. Did we?
Yeah, we did.
Did
we
think this would be what it was?
See, I always thought with this fight that it was going to be another great fight, but with a clear favourite and a clear winner in Canelo. Now, Canelo was the clear winner, and he was the clear favourite. But Golovkin was so disappointing for those first 8 rounds. Really disappointing. Like, it wasn't a close fight. No, I think Canelo dominated the rounds he won, and I think Golovkin nicked a few rounds then later on in the fight. The first round maybe could have been a draw, but he showed he had something in the tank in those last few rounds and put Canelo under a little bit of pressure.
That was starting in round 9. Nine.
He started, like I was saying all along in the commentary, he can't pull the trigger. All those little phrases that you pick up. He can't pull, and that's a sign of a shot fighter. When you can't pull the trigger. I say shot fighter in terms of what he was, of course, not compared to others. But he's not the Golovkin he was, nowhere near. And you mentioned in commentary after that, there will be a queue of people now who didn't want to even whisper Golovkin's name, that will be stood on mountains shouting for him.
And would have been not actually running towards him 4, 5, 6, and 7 years ago. Now, as you say, there'll be busloads of people trying to get to him. There'll be a queue around the boxing block. Let's just do a bit of background here. Between the two of them, they had before tonight 105 fights with 50 world title fights between them. They're veterans. They're old school fighters. The like and type we'll never see again. Canelo, a very old 32, having turned pro at 15. He had 21 professional fights by the time he was 18, which is quite incredible. He'd had 61 fights, 157, lost a couple, and Golovkin's stats are even better in many ways. Over 300 amateur contests, an Olympic medal back in 2004. But he is 40 years of age. That was his 45th fight. His previous 44, he's won 42, 37 quick, lost one, that controversial loss to Canelo back in 2018, and one draw. So those are the raw stats. So let's be absolutely honest, this is not us being after-timers. We knew that they were probably not at their peaks, and we mentioned that straight away. But they're still, Canelo holds Canelo holds the 4 versions of the super middleweight world title, and Golovkin holds 2 versions of the middleweight title. So these are not old men in the twilight of their careers coming from a couple of defeats or having a couple of easy fights. They're still men, to use an expression, at the top of their game, Barry. So why didn't the fight ignite from the first round?
Well, I just think the onus was on Golovkin, clearly. I just think that Canelo, they're going to be tentative a little bit in the first round because they both know what they're
capable of.
What they can offer, yeah. So you can make a mistake because the guy opposite you can punch as hard as anyone else. But he just never got going, Golovkin. And I did mention before about when you get older, you might have, if you had power, that stays. Even sometimes speed stays. Even the appetite stays. But your vision sometimes lacks. And what I mean with vision is you just you see the shot just a minuscule too late, and then with that makes you a bit tentative to commit yourself. And I think that's what I think maybe he felt that in the Murata fight there, Golovkin
in April in Japan when he won a version of the world title.
He didn't look vintage Golovkin, but in the end he got the job done and quite impressively against a big strong guy. But he was easier to hit, and he did get hit back on, not hurt, but hit back on his heels. Things we haven't really seen before. And you tend to think, is that just because he's just not seeing the shots like he used to? No, going into the fight knowing that against someone like Canelo made him tentative. He was getting his feet in the right position at times there, Golovkin. And again, not committing, not letting his hands go. In the previous fight, he was blocking and countering. They were fighting when they were both in range. They were both committing. And it seemed like Canelo was willing to do that, but Golovkin was taking 2 steps back and then not being able to fire back.
And you actually pointed out after about round 3 or 4 that he looks like he can't let his hands go, which is something that happens to fighters when they're good enough to know they've lost that little bit of edge in speed. They don't want to overcommit and therefore leave themselves exposed. I mean, I think we've got to be a bit careful we're not too harsh on the fight itself, because it's still 2 class operators. And I thought the first 8 rounds from Canelo were close to flawless. Perhaps he's guilty of not putting his foot down on the pedal a bit more. Golovkin's definitely guilty of not letting his hands go. But perhaps the slight movements that Canelo does, and we picked up on it in the first round, where he did a little move where he kept moving to the left. So he kept making Golovkin have to turn. And if you're turning, you're thinking about turning, not about throwing punches. So in many ways, the first rounds 1 to 8 were, I'm not going to say masterclass, that's too strong, but they were clever, they were controlled, they were poised from Canelo.
What he does, he just sort of feints Canelo. You almost don't see him. But if you're in front of him, you feel it. And that just makes you...
That's what I was saying.
Something's coming. But what he does so well, and it's a beautiful move, he feints with a jab and then comes over the long left hook. And it's a long left hook as well. So he feints with a jab. You think you're out of distance. You lean back a little bit.
Big high left hook.
Yeah, because he feints well. It's a shorter jab and he throws it long. And he sort of leaps off the front foot a little bit, gets into the distance and catches you every time. And that puts a panic in you. And then when you panic, of course, you throw less punches because you feel you need to be safer before you throw. Now, that never happened in the first 2 fights with Golovkin because he knew how good his chin was, and he knew that if he could hit you, he could hurt you. Even though he couldn't seem to hurt Canelo in those first 2 fights, he still knew that you would feel it. But in this fight, it was different. So when he did get caught with that Golovkin, he wasn't hurt. There was no real drama at all. Actually, there was no drama at all in the fight, full stop. But...
Which is a really crazy thing to say.
It's mad.
How can we sit here after a third installment between these 2 warriors, these 2 great fighters, these 2 icons, legends, guaranteed Hall of Fame men, and say there was no real drama when we watched 36 minutes of boxing? That seems ridiculous.
And I think that's why people, and that's why the public and the media will be really harsh on this fight, because the first 2 were epic affairs. Would have stood.
So your
bar
is raised very high.
It's too high. That's the problem. And so there you're judging it on that, of course, and that's so they're going to get a little bit of criticism, and it'll fall on Golovkin because he showed in those last sort of 4 rounds, whether he won them all or not, that he had stuff in the tank that he could, almost, as you sort of said, imitate an old Golovkin, the real Golovkin.
That was in about round 7 or 8, I said that. And I agree. Ron McIntosh was doing a commentary with us, and I said to the pair of you, it looks like this is someone imitating Golovkin, playing Golovkin, not letting his hands go, half shadow boxing, if anything.
Well, sometimes the whole thing of just getting old overnight, well, not quite overnight with Golovkin, is you try and go through the motions. That muscle memory thing that you also spoke about is something that you need to do. You get it from the gym into the ring. I mean, sometimes when you get older, you try and go through that repertoire in your mind. Oh, I can do this. I'll just do this. So you go through the repertoire of skills, but it doesn't click the same. And again, it's all about your vision, your timing, all those things that start to wane as you get older. And I think it was evident tonight. I'm not saying I don't think he would have beat Canelo anyway, even if he was better. But it would have been a better spectacle in the early rounds.
No, I understand that you can't change the way you fight and just get too urgent and just get too reckless. But why do you think, as a fighter and as a man that studied Golovkin and Canelo up close several times at ringside, why is it that he didn't start really trying, really pushing it until round 9, the last 4 hours. Why? Because it was a clear switch. It was like suddenly, finally, Jonathan Banks in the corner, who was working for him for I think only the 3rd time. It's like he suddenly reached in and got him. But Banks had been telling him to be a bit more urgent. Show me the man I know from about round 2 or 3, Barry.
But you have to telling someone's great. But if the fighter doesn't feel it, then. But he listens to your instructions. He's going through everything his body's telling him. He's going against everything his body's telling him to do. So it's having confidence in your ability. And again, I go back to that what I said in the commentary, pulling the trigger. He was afraid to do it then. And again, it's all down to that, just the timing and your vision, and that almost at that sixth sense that you would have had at your peak, where you're comfortable, confident. I'll block this shot and then I'll fire off it. And you saw it's an educated risk that you're gonna, if you miss, he might catch you, but it's worth taking it because you hit him, you're gonna hurt him, and he was too tentative to do that. He wanted to. You see how close he got his feet at times, and still never let his hands go.
Their toes were overlapping, but every now and again, when the screen, when you'd see more of the screen, their front feet, their left feet, were actually inside each other's bodies. That's incredible.
And in other previous fights against other opponents and against Canelo. He chops down with that left hook. He chops down with that right hand.
He did it once.
He throws double jabs. Now, the jab was good throughout the fight, I thought, from Golovkin, again, like he was in the second fight. But it wasn't with the same conviction, the same energy, and he wasn't doubling up the jab. And it was never a jab to push him back. It was a jab to stop Canelo, advancing too much onto him. And
then from the 9th round, he does get busier. So the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, he gets busier, and we get four decent rounds. Four rounds really that in any other fight we'd be perfectly happy with. It's just that the standards, the bar, as we mentioned earlier, are set so high. So during those last 4 rounds, I'll tell you what slightly alarmed me during those last 4 rounds was how marked up he suddenly looked, Canelo. He kept, different marks were coming up on his face. And not just that, just how tired he looked. And in fact, Ronald McIntosh said something about the end of about round 8 or 9. He said, dare I say this? And he kind of caught himself. He said, dare I say this? It looks like Canelo's breathing heavy. And it looked that way to me too.
Well, it did then. He also, we have to say, it looked that way against Bivol, to be honest. And I think
that's the fight he had back in May when Canelo lost, when he stepped up to light heavy.
For only the second time in his career. And I think that he's had things such his own way, or so much his own way, before, from Mayweather up until Golovkin 1 and 2. And then certainly those 8 fights from Golovkin, or 7 fights from Golovkin to Bivol, where he just did what he wanted, was a bully, boxed at his own pace, dictated everything. That I think it's difficult for him now to up and down the pace like he used to be able to. Sometimes someone ups the pace, you can go with them, and then you take over that. You dictate the pace by taking over that, because they're not expecting you to match their pace. Now, being able to be a reactive fighter and still be aggressive is such a gift, and he could do that. He could react to you and then take it off you. And I don't think he can do that anymore. I just think the weight he's moved up at. Just he's in a set mode now, especially this age. It's hard to change.
And he looked fleshy, didn't he? I know it's only 8 pounds, and you'd think, I thought we'd see him looking that much bigger, but it just looked there was a little bit of flesh on his belt line. It just looked like he was carrying the weight as extra weight.
But we say all this, I still don't see anyone in that division who beats Canelo.
No, neither do I.
Benavidez, maybe if he can still make that weight, but he's really still an untested guy who's had 60 fights. Guys who really have had a long apprenticeship. He's one of them. But I still think he's still the number 1 in that division, clearly. And Golovkin, even though he showed signs of weakness there, you still got to think he's still number 1 in the middleweight division. If he decides to go back down.
And how ridiculous is that? Here we are analysing this in the middle of the night, and we're trying to balance the criticism with looking for some positives. As you said, there's going to be a cavalcade of criticism attached and thrown at exclusively Golovkin's performance, certainly in the first day,
and the judges.
Maybe not. Me personally, I thought it was not a shutout, but I thought it was a 10-2, 9-3 at the very best. The judges didn't. Two of the judges had it 7-5. So they just one round.
I can't see that.
You know, if Golovkin wins one round, it's a draw, which I can't see. That's neither here nor there. Let's leave the judging for another day. The point I'm trying to make is we've got to be really careful here of somehow suggesting that these two are finished. They're not. They're still the dominant heavy. They're still the two dominant fighters at 168 and arguably at 160. And it's just because of the excellence of their first two fights and their careers that we judged them so harshly.
I think the Canelo that we see now, this Canelo doesn't change anymore. So he's still good enough to beat almost anyone. But the moving up to light heavy is something that he wants to revenge with Bivol. I don't see that happening because I don't think he can adapt like he used to. Because of age,
and
maybe.
Bivol had a lot left in the tank, didn't he, in that game?
Well, Bivol just followed him out when he retreated and wasn't intimidated by Canelo at all. And I think Golovkin, can still maybe beat guys, but there's a gap now. There's a little creak in the armory that can be exploited against a younger, fresher, more athletic fighter like a Charlo.
Yeah.
You still put Golovkin in favour against Charlo, but now after seeing that, Charlo could get a quick lead and dance his way to the end of the fight, possibly. And so you're starting to think, what does he need now? He's been a tremendous fighter. He's earned, just from those 3 fights with Canelo alone, he's earned enough money more than God. He don't have to spend the money, and he can spend that money, could he? As long as he lived. So, and he's been a great fighter. He's been the most dominant middleweight we've had since Bernard Hopkins.
Yeah.
So what's left to prove for him? Unless he wants to continue to fight. So listen, you're talking about fighters who strive for greatness here, and they don't think the same as us.
But when he was in that, and because they're not the same as us, even you and you're part of that sacred fraternity. They don't even think the same as you. These are guys that are in some sort of rarefied, different level. Barry, but he talked afterwards, and he seemed a bit shocked at the suggestion that he might not continue. And he said no. He said something along the lines that I've got lots of plans. So there are obviously, and there will be even more. I mean, there's a dozen middleweights he could fight that would be fairly entertaining.
And there's a dozen middleights now who want to fight him.
Absolutely, that's the truth.
No one want to go near him. Yeah. And you mentioned in the commentary, early in his career, when his reign as a world champion, as Ronald said, it's been muddled because we had the super champion and a regular champion, with thank you WBA, of course. But no one wanted to go near him. He was fighting in Monaco and places like that. Everyone was just staying away from him.
He fought in a little room in Cologne once. A Vladimir Klitschko fight was cancelled. I'm not sure if it wasn't the second fight against Derek Chisora or the first fight with Derek Chisora. Yeah. And so it was moved from a giant hall into a small place. And no word of a lie, I think we did it on Box Nation. It was the tiniest of venues. It was like a banqueting suite. And there were, Barry, if you could try and get a still of it, there's like 70 people in there. And I think it was like his fourth defence or his second or third defence.
That's what I mean. It's just, who wants to go near this guy? He wasn't, at the time, he wasn't marketable. He was from a country called Kazakhstan. Even back, it's not that long ago, most people didn't know what Kazakhstan was. They don't know, was it a country or what?
Borat put it on the map.
Pretty much so, yeah. But, it's the case that, and he can punch holes through walls. Well, he doesn't tick any box.
And he looked like he could punch holes through walls.
From the offsets.
And you heard people squealing when they went down. Matt Macklin squealing when they go down. When he hurt people with everything he threw.
And he beat you up as well. He didn't outbox you. He didn't knock you out cold. Very rarely. He beat you up. It was sort of a glee about it. Dare I say it, almost like a sort of like a boxing serial killer type of scenario. He wasn't good enough just to hurt you. He wasn't good enough just to knock you out cold, get you out there early. He just walked you down for 4 or 5 rounds, slowly thudding you to submission. And it was, and I've been obviously I've been ringside. So I don't know if I mentioned that.
You did, Carl Froch, yeah.
Yeah, I know. But when you hear the shots, you just think, how do you stand up with that? Yeah. You do. I remember my ex-girlfriend when I boxed Freitas. She's seen some of my early fights, but me and another guy been tapping each other with 2 little 9-stoners tapping each other. And then when I boxed him, she said, I'd never heard anything like it in my life. When he hit you, I thought he hit you with a baseball bat. The noise it made,
the crack.
And I said, I missed that, love. I didn't get to see that. What happened? But it is when you're a real devastating puncher. when you hear them, just the noise is different, the sound's different, and you can't put your finger on why it is. Timing, natural power, speed, athleticism, all those things they have. And when he hits you, when you hear it, you just go, oh, I don't want. I would never. No, you couldn't pay me enough to want to take that. And Canelo was the same,
Yeah.
When he throws a shot, when he throws that left hook, certainly to the body.
Yeah, you felt you can hear it, and then
you winded
then they
ringside.
go down and let
you
you know.
winded ringside, haven't you? You've been it.
Liam Smith, Liam Smith. I can still hear him when he was dropped by different shots, especially the body shots. So listen, that's the Golovkin, the Triple G appreciation. We know he's going to continue. You could tell by the look in his eyes he's going to continue. Is he the man he used to be? Absolutely not. Is he still a force? Well, it would appear so. Let's look at Canelo. First of all, what's interesting is Canelo put down, not exclusively, he said part of the reason I lost to Dimitri Bivol is I was tired. I've had a really busy period. I was tired. That fight's in May, and this fight's in September. So basically, he's had 3 weeks off when he was tired. So that's quite interesting. Then he talked straight away about his left hand, how his left hand wasn't right, and he wasn't throwing the left hand maybe as much. And I'd said earlier on, and you said as well, I think all three of us had said that the left hand he was like touching, but not necessarily touching. That's selling him short, but he wasn't letting it go full whack. What does he do? Assuming he needs 4 or 5 or 6 months, does he go straight for Bivol? Is that what you think? Is that what you think his ego and his drive and his desire and his heart are telling him to do?
I think so. Because again, one of the craziness of great fighters is that they just resting on their laurels is not enough for them. Be already cement your legacy is not enough. You got to strive for more. That thirst for continued success is what's made them what they are, I think, and I think it's a stupid move for him to the guy's barely taller than me, Steve. Yeah. I say that, we're not even laughing.
I didn't laugh either.
No,
I hope you know that.
He's barely taller than me, and he's boxing like heavyweights, and it's just madness. It really is. Like, he doesn't need to prove anything, but he's in that enviable position where he can do what he wants to do.
Yeah.
He might be the only boxer in world boxing right now who can just do what he wants to do. Because he's a cash cow. Everyone wants to fight him from light middleweight, super welterweight, up to cruiserweight, which we talked about, by the way. He talked about cruiserweight. If he was to be Bivol, he's boxing.
It was fine. Makuba. Wasn't he meant to?
Yes.
He was meant.
It's the same guy, but I said his name wrong.
Yeah, listen, that's generally my game. Don't need my game. He was meant to fight him. They shook hands, I think, last December at the WBC convention. Maurizio Sullivan, Jose's son, he rubber stamped it, and that's what we expected in April.
So in many ways, the Bivol defeat did him a favour because it sort of checked his ego a little bit. Hang on, you're going a bit too far here. But he never got beat up or hurt against Bivol. He got, hurt a little bit, but not seriously hurt. Yeah. So you can see why he'll want to go again. But I think he should just stay where he is and just keep dominating. But will boredom play a factor? The thing is,
contempt sometimes can play a factor.
Very few boxers know when it's time, and it's usually even like Joe. You know how much I love Joe Calzaghe, and being Welsh, of course. But he seemed to bow at the right time. But that's because his hands were damaged for like the last 4 or 5 years of his career, Steve, to be honest. And you know that. Absolutely. So if they weren't, he would have continued. And maybe he got beat in the end. Because again, these fighters they want this. They're drunk on success. Yeah. And understandably,
it is interesting that let's stick with that sort of idea. What makes fighters eventually walk away is that for instance, with Lennox Lewis, it wasn't that. Did Lennox have fights left in him? Yes, he did. But did Lennox have 10 and 12 week training camps left in him? No, he probably didn't. His body was starting to see. And you remember, Vitaly Klitschko had to have that 2 or 3 years out because his body had basically shut down. Yeah, that wasn't necessarily from the fights. That was for preparing for all of those multiple fights.
Nobody wants to retire from something you love to do.
Yeah.
Ever. So it's usually age, or you're just not good enough, or usually injuries. When people retire undefeated or retire because look at Floyd Mayweather. He retired undefeated. He could have gone on and still beat most people, and he was cherry picked or whatever, or boxed the best and still beat them. He's that good. Even he's going back. He's retired, but he's going now doing exhibitions. No, not.
I've lost track of his exhibitions.
Not because he needs the money, though. No, money's money to him, of course, and he wants more of it. But because he loves doing this, and the training camps are not as intense because he didn't have to spar, he didn't have to run too much,
didn't have to train,
didn't do anything really. He just keep himself reasonably fit, and that's what really breaks most fighters down. So like Joe Calzaghe looks like a genius. He retired undefeated, 46-0, at the right time, but it wasn't that. I mean, it was that, and I'm glad for him, but. it was the injury. Otherwise, he carries on.
Yeah,
he carries on until he gets beat. That's what happens with all great fighters. But now Canelo's lost again. He's not defending. He's not defending that. Let's take Mayweather out of the occasion, because Mayweather's an all-time great. That almost undefeated record, bar Mayweather. He's had a loss now against a guy who's not going to go down in the all-time greats of history in Bivol. I wouldn't have thought. Who knows? But so he has a reason. He just bow when he wants to. He's nothing protecting him now. He's had a great career. He's been one of the greatest Mexican fighters, not the greatest, but one of the greatest Mexican fighters who've ever lived. And he's earned, again, like the same as I said about Golovkin, even more so. Money. Well, look at him. He could buy countries.
It's like half a dozen. It's like about 8 or 9 fights at 40+ million. Probably another 5 or 6 at 25 and 30. I mean, hundreds and I mean, what is? Let's just have a look at this. I mean, there are people that keep tallies of figures. I keep less of a tally of figures because I know so many figures are fabricated anyway. Yeah. Let's remember that. But even if you work on some of the fabricated figures, so who's made more money than him in boxing over the years? Floyd obviously has made more. Maybe Tyson Fury. Maybe not yet. So
no chance.
I mean, so Floyd and I mean, did Tyson's 400 million? That's not even going to be more. So basically, he's the second highest paid. It's quite safe to say that Canelo Alvarez, second highest paid boxer ever behind Floyd Mayweather, and he'll be pushing Floyd because of the amount of fights there. Here's the thing, Barry. Throwing it forward, when his hand's good and when he fights again. I tell you what I can't see. I can see Golovkin suddenly retiring. I can see a younger guy. Actually, he marked up quite easily tonight. I can see a younger guy hurting him and marking him up, and Golovkin not getting to him. I can see that, and that making him get closer, moving him closer to retirement. What I can't see a Canelo retirement. I can't see that in 18 months, 2 years, he has this fight or that fight and retires. It's a really weird thing.
But this was sort of the mark for them both to retire, really, wasn't it? That we thought, like, we all felt
they just nudged the door open.
Well, we all felt that the Golovkin's going to get beaten. This is the time to say, listen, this is it now. I got the trilogy I asked for. I didn't get the result, but I'm out now. Thank you for everything. Give me my check. I'm gone. And for Canelo, I've done more than I ever thought I would do. I've dominated from light middleweight, from super welterweight right up to light heavyweight. And I got the trilogy. I'm the winner of this. This is my greatest rivalry, and I've dominated it on paper. Of course, he hasn't, but on paper he has.
Yeah. I
can go happily now. There's nothing else, nothing more for me to prove. But they don't think like you and I. They don't even think. No, they don't. Enough's never enough for those guys.
So when it was over after 12 rounds and after the last 4 rounds that were the more than decent rounds when Golovkin came back into the fight, and I haven't broken down the scorecard, so I don't know exactly what rounds the judges gave specifically, but I'm assuming most, if not all, of the judges gave Golovkin those last 4 rounds. Now whether there was a little bit of mercy judging there, I don't know, but the scores worked out. Two of the 3 judges had it 115 to 113, so that's 7-5 in rounds. And the other judge, Dave Moretti, a regular at ringside, had it, if I'm not mistaken, 116, 112. So that's 8-4. Now, the 8-4, in my opinion. And what I do with fights, I never watch fights back. So if my immediate reaction, the emotional reaction at ringside or watching it live, that's my reaction.
Your only scorecard is your first viewing, and
Absolutely.
also they're usually just a live viewing because you don't get no outside influence from anyone else unless you check in Twitter or other stuff.
Well, you couldn't 25, 30 years ago. You
exactly.
were stuffed.
So you got to go that your first viewing, whether you get it right or wrong, has to be what you think of the result.
Stand by it.
Anything else is tainted by other people's opinions. Yeah. That's what I would say that much. But Dave Moretti have judged all 3 of those fights.
What a way to earn your 10,000 or 15,000 a gig, eh?
It's not bad, but
it's beautiful.
And I think he sort of got it right on all 3. Though I thought Golovkin won the.
But the other two, the 7-5, I think the 2 judges that had it 7-5, I think that might have some legs. I think people might look at that. I said in the heat of the moment on air when we were talking at the end, because you and Ronald had it not close, but closer than I did, and I said on air, I think that those two scores, 115, 113, those are behind Adelaide Bird's score in the first fight when she made it 10-2 to Canelo. I think those scores are really bad. But But I'll stand to be corrected on that. You know, I'm not. If it turns out, Buncey, it was a close fight.
I sort of agree and disagree in the same thing.
You're allowed to, son. It's a democracy.
Yeah, but it's called Buncey's Boxing Show. But anyway, it's
Still is.
But
at the moment, it is anyway.
So when you're watching the fight and Canelo wins, especially as a big portion of the round where he's winning rounds continuously, and he's winning rounds quite dominant.
Yeah.
And Golovkin's nicking rounds. So the overall impression is Canelo's totally dominated the whole fight.
Yeah.
When you actually break down scoring round by round, he's still dominated the fight and he still won clear enough.
Yeah.
On everyone's scorecard, on mine, on Ronald's, and clearly on yours, but it becomes a little bit closer mathematically because of that. I said I give two rounds. I think even, but if I would have given it to anyone, I would have given to Canelo. But you can't say that. That's a ridiculous thing. I'm saying that. I understand what I'm saying, but that's ridiculous because then are they mercy rounds like they're mercy drawn rounds like given to Golovkin?
Yeah.
I just wasn't convinced enough that anyone did enough to win those rounds.
It's that famous asterisk that I like to attach to rounds. So I'll look at the 12 rounds that I scored there, and I haven't got an asterisk against any round.
Yeah.
There's 3 or 4 rounds I've got tighter. But only because that's reference to tighter than the previous round, which Golovkin lost clearly. That's generally what that means.
I had 170 and 112, and that's my card, and so that's a clear winner on paper for me. That's still 4 rounds with the other way to get a draw, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I don't see that. I think that's a clear fight. That's a clear winner. Clear. I think he took his foot off the gas in the last few rounds. Golovkin made a bit more of an effort.
Yeah.
But he needed a knockout to win. And he couldn't get it. And we were all saying that, and I think everyone must have felt that. Certainly in the arena, a lot. You must have felt that. He needs something bigger than what he had.
Barry, it's always a pleasure to work on one of these fights. I'm so sorry, and I feel slightly guilty.
It's your fault.
It is my fault that we weren't in Vegas. I think everyone realises that. I said after Saudi Arabia, I'm not doing another 9 days somewhere hot and splendid with great pools and having great access to fighters and going ringside. Yes, I did say that, even though people accused me of not saying that. I did say that. Barry, it was a pleasure and a delight having you here for this one and walking through this one. Now, before I let you go, and just as it starts to get light here, I've got to throw forward to this weekend's fight. Sadly, we're not going to get the fight that I think we all wanted to see, which was Lee Wood defending his featherweight title against Maurizio Lara, which is, I thought, one of the bravest, the most ridiculous fights. I was so looking forward to it. Sold out in Nottingham. That's not on. There are a couple of good fights on that bill. Interesting fights. Maxi Hughes against Kid Galahad, which is really intriguing. And then there's a women's light middleweight world title fight, which is a really interesting one. Terry Harper jumping up from super feather, doing a Natasha Jonas, going up to light middle to fight Hannah Rankin. I want to ask you about that in a second, but the big one is going to be taking place about 3 miles from where we're sitting. The number 1 WBO heavyweight and the number 2 WBO heavyweight. Joe Joyce being number 1, Joseph Parker being number 2. In a fight that Joe Parker looked at me when I talked to him and said, Steve, why is he taking this? Barry, I'm going to ask you. Barry Jones, I ask you. Why is Joe Joyce fighting Joseph Parker when all he's got to do is sit on his bottom and get a world title fight? Why?
Because how long do you sit on your backside for? That's the thing. How long? He's been inactive enough as it is. Because waiting for hopefully those titles to fragment and then get a vacant shot at the title or for somebody. So sometimes you just got to force the issue. And I think it's a great fight. And
it's a great fight.
To be fair to Joyce, he's had a really hard apprenticeship and he hasn't been shy of any challenge. Yeah. And and I think he genuinely believes that no one can hurt him. But I listened to Andy Lee the other day, and he was pretty much thinking that Parker is not going to just outbox him; he's going to knock him out.
Yeah.
They're sold on. I can't see it. Parker's been a champion. He's been a world champion before. Winning a very close fight against Andy Ruiz when they were both undefeated at the time. Was clearly on the scorecards, but I thought it was really close, and I thought Hughie Fury might just nicked the fight when Parker come over to Manchester to box Hughie Fury to defend his title.
I wouldn't have complained if you got it that night.
I thought he just nicked it, but he was too negative, and I understand why he didn't get it. But for Parker, I think he's good, but doesn't do anything great.
Yeah.
And I just think, I just can't see how he hits hard, but I don't think he hits hard enough.
But okay.
I can't see how Joyce doesn't walk through him. Not easy for Joyce.
No, sure.
No fight's easy for Joyce because of the way he fights.
Because of the way he fights.
And he gets hurt, and he gets knocked back. But he recovers and fight, and he's such an immovable object, Stephen. He's so busy that I can't see that after round 6, 7, 8, 9, or whatever it takes him, that Parker's not absolutely shattered.
Well, let me, if we're going to name drop our Irish friends, you've done Andy Lee, I do Carl Frampton. I posed a question to Carl Frampton, and it was a simple question. It was the Joe Parker before Andy Lee, the one that was a bit, didn't get involved as much, didn't go over his front foot as much, didn't look to knock people out, Kronk style, overused expression. Would he have had a better chance against Joe Joyce? Or as Andy Lee seems to be suggesting to you, and he's also said the same thing to me, that this Joe Parker will meet Joe Joyce. He knows too much, he hits too hard, he hits too often, and he'll get to him. Which is the best Joe Parker to beat Joe Joyce? Sorry, it's early in the morning, son.
Yeah,
you haven't had your coffee or your cereal, but that's the way it works.
You tend
to think
you've got to be mobile and move and keep him at bay, but also you've got to gain his respect. No, Hammer knocked Joyce back with shots, and you could see it. But still, he just seems like a guy who will just continue to walk through you. I think you have to hold your ground with him a little bit, but until the movement, I don't think you dance away from him. The movement has to be. And my favourite word, pivot. You have to move around the target, closer to the target. You have to spin on our front foot. No, these are big guys, so it's harder to do it. But you have to keep moving, but keep turning him so he can set himself to throw the shot.
It's a great fight, isn't it?
It's a really good fight. It's a great fight. It's a great fight that neither one needs. Yeah. It's a great fight neither one should have. Yeah. Let's be honest. In this climate where you can avoid fighters like the plague and still, especially at that division, and still get a title shot. Yeah. No, you have to commend both. They're getting well paid for it, so let's not feel let's not get too much praise. But you have to commend them both for taking the risk, and it is a risk because it doesn't end your career, but it's a bigger problem for Parker if he loses than it is for Joyce. Parker's just done a deal with Sky.
Even though Parker's younger.
He's just done a deal with Sky, and I know and his first fight's on another channel, of course. And Joyce, it sets him back because the juggernaut will no longer be the juggernaut if he gets knocked out.
Yeah, he'll end up in a lay-by. So I like the fight a lot. That's on Saturday at the Manchester. I'm not even sure what it's called anymore. The Manchester Arena. We'll call it Manchester Arena.
AO.
The AO to you as well. Joseph Parker. Number 2 in the world, ranked at WBO, former world champion, went 12 rounds, of course, with Anthony Joshua against Joe Joyce, who's the number 1 WBO contender. That's the heavyweight fight. And across the Pennines in Nottingham, it's going to be Hannah Rankin against Terry Harper. Can Harper do a Jonas and make it look easy moving up in weight and gaining 20-odd pounds or whatever it is?
Again, it's one of those massively unknown. Only in women's boxing you get this. It's absolute madness. But it seems,
in one move,
it seems a massive jump. It really does. But because I don't think she has the same power as a Jonas. But Hannah Rankin gives you gaps. Yeah. But since she won the WBA, she had another title. Since she won the WBA title, she's grown in confidence.
Yeah, she has grown in confidence. And she looks different. She's fine. Her shape's changed.
So you have to make her a massive favourite. And the fact that the way they'll say obviously Baumgardner when she lost her WBC super featherweight title against Baumgardner when she got knocked out. Hannah Rankin. Terry Harper. Thanks, Steve. Terry Harper.
So I'm here for, son.
You are, yes. Only here for that.
Thank you, darling.
Then you would tend to think that they'll say it was the weight that resistance. We tend to think if a super featherweight can do that to you, then a big, and she's big, a big super welterweight will be able to, will be able to, if not knock you out, stop you in your tracks.
Well, I was in the gym 2 weeks ago, a week before Savannah Marshall and Clarissa Shields' fight was cancelled, and Terry Harper was there looking about 11.5 stone, so over the light middleweight limit. And I've got to tell you, there wasn't an ounce of flesh on her. How that woman did super featherweight, I will never know.
Her legs.
Yeah, they're
full of muscle. They're massive legs. They're like weightlifting. They're full of muscle.
She's an extreme athlete. Anyway,
she's good enough to win, by the way. But I think it's still a bit uphill task.
Yeah, and I think perhaps the old Hannah Rankin has been replaced by this new look Hannah Rankin, whose body's different, and more than that, whose head is different. Just briefly, Barry. I love this fight because it's got all the kind of things that means it's probably going to be horrible to watch, but it's kind of it drags me, it sucks me in. Kid Galahad, who is a guy that divides opinion, against Maxi Hughes, who is a guy that inspires people, a guy from the wrong side of the boxing tracks, and it's for an IBO title. It's almost irrelevant. It's just it's for a lot of pride, and it's a really interesting fight, and one of them could bounce from that and end up with a nice payday.
Yeah, it's a really good fight. It's an intriguing fight as well, because first thing you think straight away, if this is super featherweight where they've both been, Well, Galahad was a featherweight, but he filtered a super featherweight, flitted with super featherweight a little bit, and Max Hughes had most of his best wins at super featherweight. Then you think, no, Galahad wins, and quite comfortable, stops him possibly, but now at lightweight.
And the run is on.
Hughes is having a real Indian summer, isn't he? Hughes is really, this is a guy you thought just going to fall short continuously at British level. Good fighter, just never get over the line for a British title, and you were gutted for him. But when he beat John O'Carroll, I was there that night to commentate on that fight, and you just thought, wow.
Yeah.
It was a very close fight. But he beat a guy here. They were touted him for going for fight for another world title, of course. And he's just halted that. Then he boxed Kotochikov, then a Kazakh boxer they were touting over in Dubai, and he blasts him, got rid of him. He drops him, hurts him heavy, and then totally outboxes him. And he thought, what's going on here? Who's this new fella? It's like they replaced again. And you talk about imitating people. It's like they replaced him with someone else.
Replicant.
So, but I still think if Kid Galahad's not carrying battle scars mentally, then I think he gets to win and gets to win quite wide.
Barry, it's been an absolute pleasure and a delight spending another night with you. There was a time back in 2014, 15 and 16 when Gennady Golovkin was at his peak. You and I were at our peak, doing 30 or 40 of these overnights each and every week, walking out in the pitch black in the winter, walking out bizarrely sometimes in the summer with people wandering by with their cigarettes, their newspapers and their dogs. It was a surreal time. Barry, it's been a pleasure and a delight to be in your company for a fight that probably wasn't as good as we wanted it to be, but it was probably as good as it possibly could be. Gennady Golovkin losing clearly to Saul Canelo Alvarez. Alvarez is off for surgery on his left hand and possibly a date with Dmitry Bivol in a rematch of their light heavyweight championship fight from May. And Golovkin, well, he looked insulted at the suggestion that might be the end. What do you mean the end? He's only had 45 fights. He's only 40 years of age. He's only been a world champion on and off for 12 years. The end is just starting after 300 or so Olympic fights. Barry, thank you very much. This has been a 5 Live Boxing. I've been Steve Bunce. Thank you very much once again, and as always, for listening.